The 12% survivor tax is a short, sharp window into the economic cost of gender based violence. The more I read, the more questions I have. And the summary report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, based in the UK, is eye opening, but it leaves me sitting with even more to think about. Specifically, where does the money go? Where does the 12% actually go? Who receives it and who benefits from it? And is it really permanent, like the IFS suggests? Or is permanent simply what we call it when nothing structurally changes? Because I've been going deeper into the research, and honestly, each time I read the report, I have another question. So I do more digging on that question to find an answer. And it's so interesting because not only am I seeing patterns, but also this report has given me a reminder of when I've given away my power because I didn't know better. Because what I found isn't just data, and like I said, the patterns. And the pattern I'm seeing is sad, it's discouraging and frustrating. And the pattern is that at every point where a woman intersects with violence as a partner, as a colleague, as a victim in the justice system, the structure around her defaults to the same outcome. She absorbs the cost. He keeps the position. It doesn't matter whether she experienced the violence directly or is living with the shadow of someone else's story. It doesn't matter whether it happened at home, at work, or in the street. It doesn't matter whether she reports it or stays silent. The economic penalty finds her anyway. And the one variable that changes the outcome, the single factor the research identifies where the cost stops defaulting to her, is women in power. Which means the pattern isn't random. It isn't an oversight. It isn't a series of unconnected failures in different systems. It's consistent enough to be structural, and structural means designed. Even if no one sat in a room and drew it up, the effect is the same as if they had. The pattern is the system was not built to protect her, she, they, them, me. And in the absence of deliberate redesign, it keeps proving that. The research is drawn from Finland, a country far less ethnically diverse than the UK, which means the 12% likely doesn't capture what women from African, Caribbean, Asian, and other global majority backgrounds experience here in the UK. 12% for this group is likely the starting point. The real number is probably much higher. Let me try and break down what I mean. Greetings, this is Like Me Officially podcast. I'm JK, and this is where raw truths meet reflection, where I challenge social narratives, explore self-advocacy, and move beyond surviving into thriving. Because if you're anything like me, you'll recognize that life is for living and living freely. Hashtag our time to thrive. So before I go any further, just a quick disclaimer. This episode does touch on sexual violence, domestic abuse, and the economic systems that surround them. If you need to pause, step away at any point, please do. You matter more than this episode, and come back when you're ready. Some context about where this research comes from, because I think it matters. Institute for Fiscal Studies, IFS. Their findings are drawn from a cluster of studies, high quality peer review conducted using administrative data from Finland. Finland, because in the Nordic countries, they can do something the UK currently can't. They can link police records directly to individual earnings data and employment records. They can actually follow the money. In the UK, we can't do that yet, which means we've been estimating the cost of gender-based violence rather than measuring it precisely. And the Home Office put it at 66 billion in 2019. And then the National Audit Office revised that to 84 billion by 2025, which is 18 billion more pounds more in just 6 years, which is mind blowing. And the National Audit Office also noted that there hasn't been an effective whole system response. What this means is that the police, the courts, employers, housing, health services, social care, they all touch on this issue, but they're not coordinated. They don't share information properly. No one is responsible for the full picture. So each one does their bit or each one doesn't do their bit. And the gaps between them is where people fall through. So basically, everybody's involved and nobody's in charge. And when nobody's in charge, the person who pays is the one already paying. So we know that the cost is rising. We know the response isn't working, and we're only now in 2026 starting to get the kind of research that tells us precisely what is happening and to whom. That's the backdrop. That is why the 12% matters so much, not just as a number, but as evidence. Evidence that those living with the full spectrum of what we call gender based violence, which includes domestic abuse, sexual violence, stalking, honor based abuse, everything the strategy names, are not and have never been the problem. The system that was supposed or thought was there to both protect and support them is the same system producing the pattern. The 12% is the income drop for women who move in with an abusive partner. And the research found that women who cohabit with a man who has previously been abusive to other women suffer the same income and employment losses, even when there is no recorded physical abuse within their own relationship. So if you're with someone who has a history of being the abusive partner, you're being taxed for his abusive history. And your only crime, if you can call it that, is that you didn't know, because it's unlikely that they will disclose their history of coercive control, financial sabotage, isolation, or job interference. These can be present long before anything is ever reported or recorded. The pattern of behavior didn't start with you. It arrived with him, and it's already at work, already taking and extracting. And somehow you're the one carrying the cost without even realizing that's what's happening. A relationship decision and the sins of the partner, that's what triggers the tax. Then there's the workplace finding. When a woman is sexually or physically assaulted at work, she experiences job loss, reduced hours, lower income. When a man is the victim of the same assault, the perpetrator loses their job. Same act, different outcome, depending entirely on the gender of the person harmed. And this is the part that I think says everything. The research looked at what happens based on who leads the organization. So in female managed organizations where women hold a significant share of senior positions, perpetrators are significantly more likely to be dismissed. In male managed organizations, the female employee leaves after an attack on her colleague, not the perpetrator, her, she. So at every turn, in every context, the cost lands on the woman. She's taxed for relationship decision, taxed for her partner's history, taxed in the workplace while the man who caused the harm stays. And she's taxed in the justice system because the research also shows that a rape survivor suffers a 17% drop in earnings 5 years after the assault. 17%. To put that in context, That is larger than the economic penalty of spending a year in prison in the United States. The victim is penalized more heavily economically than the convicted criminal. Wow. This is a mess. I mean, not my thinking, it's just the situation. It's a mess that has been built brick by brick, decision by decision across centuries, and it is only now being measured. The IFS called the 12% permanent. Here's what I think. Permanent is what happens when the conditions that created it stay the same. Permanent assumes nothing can ever change. And I'm not ready to accept that because the research also shows something important about what actually reduces this. When women have financial autonomy, rates of domestic abuse fall. When the gender pay gap narrows, domestic violence reduces. When cash transfers are directed to women, intimate partner violence decreases. When police bring criminal charges against abusers, reoffending falls by almost 40%. And the last one, when police bring criminal charges against abusers, reoffending falls by almost 40%. Wow. Because the same research found that when police carry out a formal risk assessment and offer protective services to victims, it doesn't reduce the probability of violence happening again. The thing we haven't been doing in the UK, the standard response doesn't work. The thing that does work, arrests, charges, consequences. And in towns, cities, and districts within Finland, where more rape reports led to actual court cases, the economic harm experienced by survivors was smaller. So the 12% is not a fixed law of nature, it's the price of a system that is not functioning as it should. And it bothers me. In fact, we should all be bothered by this because this tax is applied without notice, it's invisible. You don't get a letter, you don't get a bill, you just gradually earn less, progress slower, and fall further behind. And nothing in the system tells you why. The person living it feels it. The system causing it doesn't see it. And until now, nobody had a name for it. It didn't happen by accident. It's baked into structures that were built deliberately over centuries to keep women dependent and contained. And the people paying it aren't paying it because they failed or did anything wrong. They're paying it because they refuse to fade away. They refuse to give up because they survived something that was designed to break them. And then they had the nerve, the audacity to still want a life on their own terms. That's what the 12% is. My question is no longer whether it's real, because it is. My question is what needs to be done to reduce it, to prevent it being applied in the first place? Because if we can name it, finally in 2026, we can dismantle it. The only exception the research found was that the one place where the woman is not the one who pays is when women hold organizational power, which tells me everything about why keeping women out of power was never accidental. There are three things I want to bring to the table. The first, the research found something about intergenerational harm. Exposure to domestic violence reduces educational attainment for children. Childhood abuse leads to low employment and earnings in adulthood. The tax doesn't stop with you. It follows the next generation unless the cycle is broken. And that to me is the most urgent argument for treating this as the emergency it now legally is. The second, the 12% is structural, not personal. It's not a measure of one's capability or resilience. It's the documented cost of a system that was never designed with you in mind. So if you've been carrying the sense that you feel like you're behind, that you've lost ground, you can't account for, understand this. You didn't fall behind. You were taxed in secret. There is a difference. And the third, the research points towards one consistent answer to what reduces all of this: women's financial autonomy. Not as a nice idea, but as a violence prevention strategy, as an economic policy, as the thing that data keeps returning to across countries, studies, across decades. The more economic power a woman has, the less vulnerable she is. The less vulnerable she is, the less the tax can be applied. So, whatever that means for you in your work, your finances, your choices, understand that. Not because I'm telling you what to do, but because the evidence is telling us all something. And I think we should listen. I started this episode wanting to follow the money, and here's what I found. The 12% doesn't go anywhere. It evaporates. It's a version of your life that was possible and didn't happen because eventually you settled. The promotion that didn't come, the salary that didn't follow, the career that had to wait while you managed something the system had no name for. The 78 billion disperses, spread thin across the NHS, emergency services, welfare budgets, employers, so thin that no single institution feels the full weight, which means no single institution is significantly motivated to fix it. And the woman at almost every turn is the one absorbing both. The mess isn't the thinking, the mess is the system, and the system can be changed, albeit slowly, but it can be changed. We know that it works because the research is telling us it works. Charges, not just risk assessments. Financial autonomy, not just awareness. Women in power, not just women in the room. I'm still reflecting on all of this, and I'm looking at the women in leadership and women-led organizations so differently. I see the gaps in my own career journey, the areas that I pushed and pushed even when I kept getting pushed back, when I've created multiple tracks that would enable me to grow. And I'm far from my dream life. Over the years, I have slowly and intentionally worked on peeling off the remnants of my lived experience because the pain doesn't just go away. I've had to work on it, layer by layer, bit by bit, whilst coexisting multiple truths. This report has indirectly put a value on the part of my journey that I battled to survive through, 12%. 12% that I will 12% that I'll never get back. However, without knowing what I know now, I stood toe to toe with this system and navigated and created new pathways that worked for me. It wasn't easy, but it was either sink or swim. I chose to swim, and now I'm on the shore, and what I know for sure is that the thrashing and the battle was worth it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Like Me podcast. If anything I've shared has made you stop, think, or see yourself just a little bit clearer, fantastic. I love this for you. I love this for me. And honestly, I love this for us. And if this episode shifted something in you, give yourself a moment to sit with it. And if anything felt a little bit too heavy, speak to someone you trust. What I've learnt is that we don't heal in isolation, and you don't have to carry any of this alone. This space isn't about staying in survival mode. It's about lifting ourselves out of the dimension that has tried to keep us trapped, and choosing a version of ourselves that's still becoming. If this resonates with you, share with someone who might need a reminder or a friend. And make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. I'm JK. Stay open, stay self-curious, and remember, it's our time to thrive.